Welcome to the Daily Brain. The word today is schmaltz. It is defined as rendered chicken fat. Another perspective focuses on schmaltz as excessive sentimentality in art and music. Now let's explore and truly understand the complete concept.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. You know I love doing these deep dives, but this one is extra special because you guys requested it.
That's right. We're going deep on schmaltz.
And as many of you pointed out, it's not just about chicken fat.
Oh.
Which is perfect because we actually have a pretty diverse mix of sources to help us out today.
We do. We've got a YouTube video all about schmaltz in music by the musician Bernard Chevalier.
Oh yeah, and Schmaltz recipe.
From Serious Eats.
Of course, we dug into some dictionaries and encyclopedias.
You can't do a deep dive without them.
And to top it all off, a Newsweek article about lounge music.
You know, I was surprised to see that connection too, but it's there.
It's really a word of two worlds, isn't it?
Totally. On one hand, you have this super rich essential ingredient in cooking.
And on the other hand,
it's this term for something that's over the top, maybe even insincere.
Especially in music.
Exactly.
Well, that's what we're going to explore today, but first things first.
Let's get literal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's start with the kitchen.
With schmaltz as rendered chicken, or goose fat.
It's been a staple in Ashkenazi Jewish cuisine for centuries.
Jews of Central and Eastern European descent.
Right. And there's a really interesting reason for that.
Kosher dietary laws.
Ah.
They restrict the use of butter and lard.
So schmaltz was the answer.
With its incredible richness and versatility, schmaltz stepped right in.
The Serious Eats recipe we have really lays it all out, how to make it the ingredients.
But before we jump into all of that...
Yeah. Why onion? What's the WHY of the onion?
Well, first of all, flavor. But it does more than that.
Okay.
It actually clarifies the schmaltz as the fat renders.
Interesting.
It gives the schmaltz that beautiful golden color.
Uh-huh.
And that nice clean taste.
And of course, we can't forget the gribbeans.
Oh, the gribbeans. Those crispy little bits of fried skin.
A gift from the schmaltz gods.
You could say that.
Okay, now I'm getting hungry. But before we all run to our kitchens...
You do have more to cover.
Schmaltz has had such an interesting history. It was this beloved staple.
Uh-huh.
Then it kind of faded from popularity.
Yeah.
And now it's back in a big way. What happened?
Well, think about changing attitudes towards food and health.
Okay.
In the mid-20th century.
Yeah.
There was this big focus on saturated fat.
Right.
And all of a sudden, schmaltz was public enemy number one.
People were told to ditch butter and lard, so I guess schmaltz got caught up in that too.
Exactly. But now...
Now things are different.
Totally different. There's this renewed appreciation for traditional cooking.
Like back to basics.
Exactly. Traditional ingredients, traditional methods.
Plus.
Chefs have been getting really creative with schmaltz.
Oh, I've seen that.
Elevating it.
Like those gourmet donuts fried in schmaltz.
Exactly. It's not just about nostalgia anymore.
Right.
Schmaltz is being embraced for its unique flavor and texture.
Even people who aren't familiar with the cultural significance are drawn to it.
They are. And, you know, this whole idea of richness that schmaltz brings, both literally and figuratively, it makes me think about schmaltz in music.
Perfect segue. Let's talk about that.
Let's.
I'm really curious to hear about this other side of schmaltz.
It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
Just like culinary schmaltz.
Okay.
Musical schmaltz is all about richness.
Okay.
And intensity.
Mm-hmm.
It aims to evoke a strong emotional response.
Okay.
Sometimes through exaggerated techniques.
Bernard Chevalier, in his YouTube video, uses the word manipulative.
Right.
Do you think all musical schmaltz is manipulative?
That's a great question. Not necessarily. It depends on the artist's intention and the context of the music.
How so?
Well, Chevalier actually demonstrates this beautifully in his video.
Okay.
He plays the same pieces by Bach and Mozart in two different ways.
Okay.
Straight and with a healthy dose of schmaltz.
I remember that.
It's really cool.
It's amazing how just like a few tweaks to the tempo, the dynamics, even the way a note is held,
totally
can change the whole feeling of a piece.
It's all about nuance. Think of musical schmaltz as adding spices to a dish.
Okay.
A little bit can enhance the flavor.
Right.
It can make it more complex and interesting.
As such.
And it becomes cloying.
Like you overdid it.
You lose the subtle interplay of flavors that make for a truly satisfying experience.
So what makes something schmaltzy, musically speaking?
Well, think about those overly dramatic pauses.
Okay.
Sudden shifts in volume.
Yeah.
And those drawn-out notes.
I can hear it.
Like a singer holding on to a high note just a little too long.
For that extra oomph.
Exactly. That's Schmaltz.
And these techniques can be really effective in the right way.
Oh, absolutely.
Like that dramatic pause.
The fermata.
Right. I'm thinking of those super dramatic arias and operas
Oh, yeah.
that are meant to be intensely emotional, even over the top.
Great example. Opera is a genre where Schmaltz can be used really deliberately and effectively to heighten the drama.
Okay, so it's all about context.
It is. Because when those same techniques are used in a context where they feel out of place or excessive, that's when it starts to tip over into the realm of musical Schmaltz.
And just like with culinary Schmaltz, it's a matter of balance.
Balance and context.
What might feel overly sentimental in one genre
Could be totally appropriate in another.
and our perception of what is schmaltzy can change over time.
Absolutely. And across cultures.
Something that was considered incredibly moving 100 years ago might sound cloying now.
100%.
It's like that Newsweek article about the resurgence of lounge music,
Right.
which some people consider schmaltzy.
But others find it cool and nostalgic.
So interesting how those perceptions change.
It is. And, speaking of change, I think it's time we shift our focus to Schmaltz's cultural impact,
Okay.
particularly with this whole lounge music revival.
I'm into it. I'm really curious to hear your take on how this musical style that some might consider schmaltzy is making a comeback.
Well, to understand that,
Yeah.
we need to go a little deeper into the history of Schmaltz as a concept.
Ooh, I like it.
It's about more than just rich food or sentimental music.
So it's like a feeling.
It's a sensibility, an attitude towards expression that goes beyond any particular art form.
So how do we define that sensibility? What does it mean to describe something as schmaltzy in a broader cultural sense?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's what we'll explore next time.
Oh.
But first,
Yeah.
we need to talk about the word itself,
Schmaltz.
Schmaltz, because its origin story is pretty fascinating. And it tells us a lot about how its meaning has evolved over time.
Okay. I'm all ears. Tell me about the word schmaltz.
Right, well, Schmaltz actually comes from the Yiddish word,
Okay.
Schmaltz,
Which means?
which literally means melted fat.
Okay.
And it came into English in the late 19th century.
Right over by.
Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe.
So the culinary meaning came first.
Makes sense, right?
Totally. But how did it go from the kitchen to the concert hall?
That is a great question. It's a great example of how language evolves. As Schmaltz became more popular in American cuisine,
Yeah.
the word started to take on a new meaning.
It's figurative meaning.
Exactly. And it started to refer to anything that was considered overly sentimental or overly emotional.
So it's like saying something is so rich and heavy,
Yeah,
you can practically taste the schmaltz.
exactly. And this use of Schmaltz as a metaphor
Okay.
really took off in the early 20th century,
Interesting.
especially in music.
Oh, so this is where we see that connection solidifying.
Exactly. Think about the Tin Pan Alley era.
Oh, yeah.
All those sentimental ballads and melodramatic performances.
Right.
That's when Schmaltz really became the word for critics to describe music they thought was too sweet.
Or saccharine.
Exactly.
So is it fair to say that the kind of negative connotation of schmaltz?
The insincere, the manipulative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that come from this period?
I think that's very fair to say. During this time, there was this growing backlash against being overly sentimental in art.
Okay.
And Schmaltz became the perfect label to just dismiss anything seen as lacking
So
authenticity.
by sophistication.
Exactly.
So here we are back at that Newsweek article
For a circle.
and the resurgence of lounge music.
It seems like there's this renewed appreciation for this style of music.
Yeah.
That was once considered the definition of Schmaltz.
What do you think is driving this shift?
I think it's part of a larger cultural trend,
Oh, interesting.
embracing nostalgia,
Okay.
finding comfort in the familiar,
I can see that.
and lounge music
Yeah.
with its smooth melodies and easy listening vibe.
It's easy.
It offers an escape.
From the stress of modern life.
Exactly.
It's like comfort food, but for your ears.
100%.
Yeah.
And just like Culinary Schmaltz has made a comeback,
Uh-huh.
thanks in part to chefs like Anthony Bourdain and Michael Solomonov.
Who really brought it back?
They championed Schmaltz. And now lounge music is being rediscovered,
By new artists.
reinterpreted by contemporary artists.
Wow.
And this brings us to the heart of why Schmaltz is so interesting.
What is it?
It's not just about identifying something as being overly sentimental.
Or emotionally manipulative.
Right. It's about understanding the context,
Okay.
the intention,
Mm-hmm.
and all the cultural forces that shape how we see things.
So schmaltz is more than just a word.
It's a lens.
I like that.
It's a way of seeing the world.
That's a great point. And I think that's something important to remember.
It is.
It's not just about identifying something as overly sentimental or emotionally manipulative.
It's about understanding the bigger picture.
Yeah, the context, the intention, the culture.
All of it.
Because ultimately, schmaltz is in the eye of the beholder.
Absolutely. What might seem schmaltzy to one person could be deeply moving to someone else.
And that's what we're going to be exploring as we continue this deep dive.
Stay tuned.
And that's something important to remember.
It is.
It's not just about identifying something as overly sentimental or emotionally manipulative.
It's about understanding the bigger picture.
Yeah, the context, the intention, the culture.
All of it.
Because ultimately, schmaltz is in the eye of the beholder.
Absolutely. What might seem schmaltzy to one person could be deeply moving to someone else.
And that's what we're going to be exploring as we continue this deep dive.
We are. We're going to talk about that duality of schmaltz.
Okay.
That tension between something being authentic.
And something being exaggerated.
Exactly. And I think that's something that really resonates with all of us.
In what way?
Well, we all crave that emotional connection.
Right.
But we also don't want to be manipulated.
Or have our emotions exploited.
Exactly. So it's like walking this tightrope.
Between genuine emotion and over-the-top sentimentality.
And you know what makes it even trickier?
What?
That line can be so blurry.
It can. So how do we navigate that?
It's tough. It forces us to ask ourselves some hard questions.
Like what?
What moves us? What feels authentic? Where do we draw the line between what's genuinely touching and what's just schmaltzy?
Ah, that is a tough one.
It is. And it reminds us that taste is subjective.
What one person finds cloying.
Another person might find deeply moving.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be aware of our own emotional responses.
And to be critical consumers of culture.
Okay, I like that.
We need to ask ourselves why something is affecting us in a certain way.
Is it really resonating with me, or is it just pushing my buttons?
That's the question. And that awareness.
It extends to how we express ourselves too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We need to be mindful of how we use schmaltz.
In our own creative endeavors.
Exactly. Whether we're writing a song, telling a story, or even cooking a meal.
Are we using schmaltz to enhance something or to manipulate?
That's the key. It's a delicate balance for sure.
It is, and I think the more we understand the nuances of schmaltz, the better we can navigate all of this.
This complex terrain of emotion and expression. Well said. And I think this deep dive into the world of schmaltz has given us a lot to think about.
For sure, both in terms of how we consume culture and how we create it.
Exactly.
And maybe that's the biggest takeaway.
What's that?
Schmaltz isn't inherently good or bad.
Right.
It's a tool.
An ingredient? A way of shaping and expressing emotion?
And like any tool, it can be used effectively or it can be misused.
Well said. And ultimately, the responsibility is on each of us.
To be aware of the power of schmaltz.
And to use it thoughtfully in our own lives and in how we engage with the world around us.
So true. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the heart of schmaltz.
It's been great.
It has. It's been a pleasure exploring this topic with you, and we hope you've come away with some new insights.
And maybe even a few questions of your own.
If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity,
we encourage you to keep exploring.
Maybe delve into those schmaltzy songs you've been avoiding.
Try that recipe that seemed a little too rich.
And most importantly, keep the conversation going.
Yes. Talk to your friends, talk to your family.
Because the more we talk about these things, the more we learn about ourselves.
About each other and about this crazy thing we call life.
I love that. Until next time, keep exploring.
Keep questioning and keep those senses engaged.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into schmaltz, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
That's a good question. I think the most important thing to remember is that schmaltz is subjective.
Whether we're talking about food music or even culture.
Right. What one person finds overly sentimental or manipulative, another person might find deeply moving and meaningful.
It all comes back to that idea of subjectivity.
It does.
Our experiences, our backgrounds, our preferences.
They all play a role.
In how we perceive and respond to schmaltz.
Exactly. And I think embracing that subjectivity is key.
Instead of trying to come up with like a universal definition of what's good schmaltz and bad schmaltz.
Right. I think we should be encouraging open and honest conversations about how these things make us feel and why.
Because ultimately it's those conversations, those shared experiences that help us understand each other better.
I couldn't agree more. And who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe through these conversations, we might discover a newfound appreciation for something we once dismissed as overly sentimental.
Maybe we'll find out that there's a little bit of Schmaltz in all of us.
And that's okay.
It's about finding that balance.
That sweet spot where genuine emotion meets artful expression.
I love that. Well said. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the heart of Schmaltz.
It's been fun.
It has. It's been a pleasure exploring this topic with you, and we hope you've learned a thing or two.
And if you're feeling inspired, we encourage you to keep exploring.
Listen to those schmaltzy songs you've been avoiding.
Try that recipe that seemed a little too much.
And most importantly, keep those conversations going.
Talk to your friends. Talk to your family.
The more we talk about these things,
the more we learn about ourselves, about each other, and about the world around us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning.
And keep those senses engaged.